What I'm doing here is improvising using a pedal tone in the left hand. Let me do it again. Pedal tones, or pedal notes as they're sometimes called, or pedal point, whatever you call them, are incredibly useful because you can create lovely, rich, lush, professional sounding effects on the piano by actually doing less. Because did you see what I was doing there? I was playing a chord progression in the right hand, but my left hand didn't change. I was just playing this G, doubled at the octave throughout. Okay, whatever happened in the right hand, I was just playing the pedal tone, pedal tones, pedal notes, pedal point, whatever you want to call it, in the left. So in today's tutorial, we're going to explore pedal tones and how you can use them to create really cool sounds on the piano. They're also a really handy way of learning more about how chords work, so we'll be touching on that as well. How cool is that? Yeah, a rich professional sound on the piano for less effort, less moving about. Let's find out more. Before we do, here's a 30-second plug for a couple of my books that I think you might like. First of all, How to Really Play the Piano is my top seller. It's been out for 10 years now and thousands of piano learners have bought it and seem to really like it. It'll teach you about chords, improvisation, lead sheets and much, much more. Then there's 7 Studies in Pop Piano, which is a collection of 7 piano pieces in a pop piano style, starting out really, really easy and moving to a more advanced and professional sound, along with loads of explanation and ideas for improvisation. They're both available as print editions and as ebooks, and please do check them both out. You'll find links to them in the description text underneath this video, in the comments underneath this video, and in the little YouTube cards in the top right hand corner of the video screen. I think you'll really like them. For now, on with the tutorial. Okay, so to show you how pedal tones work and kind of explore the music theory behind them, we're just going to be working on this simple chord progression that you heard me improvising on a minute or two ago. Here it is. As you can see, it's just 4 bars, 4 measures long. It's in the key of G major, and the first 3 bars just contain single chords. So the first bar contains a chord of G, the second bar a chord of D, the third bar a chord of A minor, but then the 4th bar is split between 2 chords. We've got 2 beats of E minor and 2 beats of D. Let me just play through that on the piano keyboard without a pedal tone in the bass, just playing the chords in a fairly straightforward way, so you can just kind of get your head around the structure of that little progression. We've got G, D, A minor, E minor, D. Something I want you to notice there, especially if you're new to improvisation on the piano, is the way that I was picking chord shapes, chord inversions that kind of lock together, that involved minimal movement from one to the other. G in that position, D in that position, A minor in that position, E minor in that position, D in that position, and largely I'm moving, I'm kind of pivoting across shared notes. So G to D, sharing the D there, D to A minor, sharing the A. Okay, the one thing I'm not doing is just playing each chord in root position. G, D, A minor, E minor, D, which is might be how you learn the chords to start with, yeah, but that's one thing we don't do. It sounds really kind of jumpy and unprofessional. So when I was just then, and when I was improvising, I was choosing chord inversions that locked together. Let me just improvise through that progression a couple of times without using a pedal tone in the bass, so you can get a sense of how it might sound if we're just improvising on it in a fairly normal way. So 1 or 2 things going on there, a little bit of anticipation, different choices of chord shapes. I was also extending some of the chords a little bit, so I think an A minor 7 chord cropped up there, you know, just a simple development of the basic A minor chord. All stuff that's fairly standard for improvisation, and if you're new to piano improvisation, by all means stick with this tutorial. I'm going to assume that you know a little bit, but if you don't, if you're really new, do please check out some of my other tutorials on improvisation and pop piano, because I've got loads of them. Okay, so I'll maybe include some links in the description text underneath this video. Now let's put our G pedal tone back underneath that chord progression and listen to the effect it has. To start with, I'll just play the chords in the right hand in a really simple way, and just really absorb the sound of the chords with the pedal tone underneath them. Here we go. Let me just play around with them a little bit. Okay, it completely changes the character of the progression. You get this more kind of, it's difficult to describe this more kind of optimistic, open, grounded kind of sound, yeah? Let me just go through what the pedal tone does to each of the chords in turn, because some of them it changes a lot and some of them it doesn't change very much. So the first chord in the progression is G. Now G with G in the bass is absolutely no surprise to our ears whatsoever, because that is just obviously the root note of the chord of G, the note that the chord is named after, yeah? So there's nothing surprising there. The surprising stuff starts to happen when we get to the second chord in the progression, which is the D with the G in the bass. Suddenly a whole new kind of universe opens up in front of us, because we've got this quite dissonant, quite crunchy sounding chord with, you know, the D shape in the right hand, but then this G. If we played the G up here, it would be really obviously dissonant because it's right next to the F sharp, but as it is, we've got this kind of incredible tension in that sound. Just listen to it. Yeah, I really love that. Why is it like that? That's because in the key of G major, D is the number 5 chord, the dominant chord. And the dominant chord in any key is the chord that has the strongest pull back to the tonic, the home chord, the number 1 chord. Yeah? So dominant to tonic, D to G. Yeah? 5 to 1. Now, what we've got going on there, when we've got the D in the right hand and the G pedal tone, the right hand is saying, let's go home, let's go back to the tonic, you know, point of maximum tension in the progression. And the left hand is saying, well, I'm already here. Okay, so we have this real kind of rich, tense sound, lots of overtones mixing up together further up the piano as we hold the pedal down. Okay, although, as I said, you know, you don't have to be using the pedal to play pedal point. It's got nothing to do with the pedals, but you know, those clashing overtones, that rich sound creates that very kind of dramatic, tense effect. Okay, so we've got G to D over G. We would write it as a slash chord, yeah, D over G we would call that. And next we've got A minor. Listen to the transition from D over G to A minor over G. Yeah. Now the effect of the G on the A minor chord is different again, because it gives it a more major kind of sound. Okay, so the A minor chord by itself sounds quite sad and sort of reflective in the key of G, but when we put the G in the bass, yeah, it brings out that more major character, and that's because really it brings it closer to being a C chord, which would work. You know, you could replace the A minor with at that point in the progression. So it brings out that major tonality in the chord. It's kind of an A major 7 chord, yeah, with the 7th really stressed, if you like, but it's kind of sitting halfway between the major and the minor there. It's a really interesting sound. Then the same thing happens with the E minor chord, normally again in the key of G major. E minor is that kind of sad, dignified major minor sound, but when we put the G in the bass, it brings out more of a major characteristic. And what we're doing there, if you're interested in music theory, is doubling, in fact tripling, the third note of the chord, which always has a very dramatic effect on the chord. And when you're taught how to compose and how to arrange, you're always told to be very careful about the doubling the third of the chord, because it creates this very, very distinctive effect in which the third note really rings out. Okay, so that's what happens there. And then we're back to the D, and we know what happens there. And that gives a real lovely tension to take us back to the G. Yeah. So the pedal tone changes the nature, the characteristics of every chord except the tonic chord itself, and that changes the nature of the whole progression. By the way, the reason they are called pedal tones is because essentially they were first used on organs, which of course have a row of pedals underneath the manuals, which play different bass notes. So as an organist, what you do to play a pedal tone is to keep your foot on one particular bass note and play different chords over the top of it. Yeah, it's not just in organ music, that's where the terminology comes from, but you come across pedal tones on the piano. Obviously in orchestral music they're really common. You will have heard pedal tones in lots of movie scores, game scores, things like that, but that's where the terminology comes from. It's nothing actually to do with the piano pedals, but it's cool to use the sustain pedal in particular, so we can let the overtones really ring out, the overtones that these rich kind of pedal tones are creating when we play them in those kind of crunchy chords like D over G. Okay, so far so good. Next question: what happens if we change the pedal tone? So far we've been using G as our pedal tone, the tonic note, the number 1 note in the scale of G major. But let's try a different one. Let's try D, which is the number 5 note in the scale of G major, and also the root note of the dominant chord, that chord that really wants to resolve back to the tonic. Okay, let me just play through the improvisation a couple of times, but with a D pedal tone. Here we go. You can hear that it's kind of transformed the progression, but this time around things are kind of inverted, if you like. When we had the G as the pedal tone, no matter where the progression in the right hand went, we always had that sense of home in the left hand. Okay, the tonic note in the left hand, which bound everything together, and when it was creating that tension there with the D chord, it was because we had that far from home in the right and home in the left, for that really crunchy sound. But this time we've got our dominant sound in the left hand all the time. Yeah, and that has a number of quite interesting effects. It gives the whole progression a much more kind of dominant character, a much kind of we are going places, something big is going to happen kind of feeling. And it also changes each of the individual chords. Let's just go through what it does to those chords. So to start with the G chord, in most ways G over D, G/D, is a perfectly ordinary G chord, because as you can see the note D belongs in the chord of G. So we're not particularly altering that chord in any particular way. It's not like when we had D over G. Okay, there was no real kind of crunch or dissonance in there. G over D, perfectly ordinary G chord, except it's a G chord played in a particular inversion. It's what we would call G played in its second inversion, or voiced in its second inversion. Just to go through inversions briefly, if we play a chord of G with the G as the lowest note, as the bass note, as we would call it, we would call that root position. G is the root note of the chord. If we play it with B as the lowest note, we would call that first inversion. And if we play it with the D as lowest note, we would call that second inversion. So this, okay, is a second inversion voicing of the chord. Even if it's not in the right hand, we're looking at the chord across the whole piano keyboard, okay? The lowest note is D, so it's a second inversion chord. Now, second inversion chords, especially when they're the tonic or subdominant chords, sorry, getting a bit technical there, but especially when they're the tonic or subdominant chords of a major key, have special characteristics, okay? Especially when the bass is really emphasized like that, because that note there, the note that's a fifth above the tonic, the D, is the dominant note, okay, the root of the dominant chord. So although it's the tonic chord, although it's the number 1 chord, we've got that little bit of the 5th in the bass just pushing us forward. So it's kind of an unsettled form of the tonic chord, and it has that kind of feeling of grandeur, of kind of epicness, if you like, as if it's going somewhere, yeah, and that's the sense that D in the bass gives it. So G over D, G in its second inversion, perfectly ordinary G chord, okay, but the voicing affects how it sounds. Then we get to G over D, and that's just a perfectly ordinary D chord, D in the bass, you know, just what we would normally expect it to be. Then we get to the A minor over D. Now, do you remember first time around when we had the G as the pedal tone? Yeah, the G gave the A minor more of a kind of major characteristic. Yeah, it kind of very subtly changed it, so it wasn't that very minor sound, it was something just a bit richer and warmer. Now, having the D in the bass changes the chord completely. The A minor over D, okay, gives us real tension. It's like we've had another D chord, or a development of the D chord. Again, that sense of going somewhere, it really contributes to the progression sense of anticipation. But then that sense of anticipation is delayed because we then go to the E minor chord over D, and there, what's happening there is very kind of ambiguous. You could say, you know, as with the E minor over G, there's maybe a little bit of the G6 chord in there, but it's very sort of, you know, what's happening there? We're kind of in between two places. But then we come back once again to the D, which now really at the end of that whole kind of dominant sounding section wants to take us back home to the tonic. So now the big question, how do you go about using pedal tones in your own songwriting, in your own improvisation, whatever? I would say there are 3 general guidelines to stick to. Guideline number 1 is that the pedal tones that work best are always the tonic and the 5th of the key you're working in. So we were in G, and first of all we used the tonic G as our pedal tone, and then we used the 5th D. You can use other notes as pedal tones, but they tend to have a much more striking and unusual effect. So let's say that we'd use the 3rd degree of the G scale as our pedal tone, B. Quite interesting in itself, but very much more distinctive and unusual. You would want to use it sparingly, and you know, if you use something like C, that would be really quite odd. Okay, so generally speaking, the tonic and the 5th are where it's at when it comes to playing pedal tones. Second guideline, use them sparingly. Okay, pedal tones are great and they're really striking, but if you used one throughout a whole song, that would get quite old quite quickly. I mean, you know, I'm not saying, you know, never say never. It might work sometimes, but by and large, if you're playing standard kind of pop or gospel or jazz repertoire, just use them for one chorus or for a short section. Okay, don't overdo them. Third guideline, I think tonic pedal tones, and this is much more of a personal feeling, but it generally holds good. Tonic pedal tones work best towards the start of a song, where they give you that feeling of kind of tranquility almost. Okay, whereas 5th pedal tones with the D in the bass and the key of G work better towards the climax of the song, because you have that general kind of dominant feeling going through the whole progression. It's like you're building towards something, yeah? So by and large, tonic pedal tones at the start, 5th pedal tones towards the end, okay? Feel free to break that rule, feel free to play around with it, but that's what I find works. And that's kind of it. The thing to do now is to get to the piano, play around with pedal tones. Remember, always use your ear, yeah? Don't worry too much about the theory in the first instance. Just think about what sounds good. Find a chord progression you like, play a pedal tone in the left, play the chords over the right, and see what happens. Okay, so that's it for another tutorial. I hope you enjoyed it. Do please remember to check out my books, How to Really Play the Piano and 7 Studies in Pop Piano. There are links below and, as I said, in the little YouTube cards in the top right hand corner of the video screen. Also, please subscribe to my channel if you haven't subscribed already. There should be a little red button down here in the bottom right. Just hit that, it'll subscribe you straight away so you can see updates of all my new videos. Also, follow me on social media, Facebook, Twitter and Instagram. Links are all below. And if you have a couple of minutes, please check out my crowdfunding page at patreon.com/Bill Hilton. Loads of interesting stuff there. Okay, I'll see you next time.